Air Canada Flight 621 was a routine morning departure on July 5, 1970. The aircraft, a Douglas DC-8-63, was carrying 100 passengers and 9 crew members, all expecting an uneventful journey from Montreal to Los Angeles, with a scheduled stop in Toronto. Among those on board were families, business travelers, and vacationers, unaware that this flight would never reach its final destination. The aircraft itself was a modern, long-range jetliner designed for transcontinental and international travel. Air Canada had recently expanded its fleet with these powerful aircraft, boasting 4 Pratt & Whitney JT3D engines that gave it exceptional range and efficiency. The airline, known for its commitment to safety, had an experienced crew operating the flight that day. At the controls were Captain Peter Hamilton and First Officer Donald Rowland. Captain Hamilton was a seasoned pilot with thousands of flight hours under his belt. He was known for his professionalism and precision. First Officer Rowland, though younger, was also highly trained, having logged considerable experience on the DC-8. Assisting them in the cockpit was Second Officer Donald Davie, who monitored systems and supported the flight crew as needed. The morning began like any other. Passengers boarded the sleek jetliner, stowing their luggage and settling into their seats. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, assisting travelers and performing final safety checks. Outside, ground crews completed last-minute inspections before giving the all-clear. At 7:17 a.m., Flight 621 lifted off from Montreal-Dorval Airport, climbing steadily into the clear summer sky. The first leg of the journey was smooth. The aircraft cruised at an altitude of 33,000 feet, with clear weather ahead. Passengers relaxed, enjoying the flight as they anticipated their arrival in Toronto. The crew, confident in their routine procedures, prepared for the descent as they neared their scheduled stop. As the aircraft approached Toronto International Airport, air traffic control provided clearance for landing. The crew began standard preparations, adjusting their altitude and configuring the plane for approach. Communication between the pilots and controllers was routine, with no indication of trouble. But inside the cockpit, a crucial decision was about to set off a chain reaction of fatal consequences. The DC-8, like many aircraft of its time, required careful handling during landing. One key step involved deploying the spoilers, devices on the wings designed to reduce lift and help the aircraft slow down. However, these spoilers had to be engaged only at the right moment, when the aircraft had fully touched down. Deploying them too early could result in a sudden loss of lift, which would be disastrous, so close to the ground. As Flight 621 descended toward the runway, Captain Hamilton, adhering to Air Canada's procedures, instructed First Officer Rowland to arm the spoilers before touchdown. This was not an unusual request, but it required precise execution. Unfortunately, as the aircraft flared for landing, meaning it was in the final seconds before touching the runway, Rowland misunderstood the command and deployed the spoilers prematurely. This simple mistake, made in a split second, immediately changed everything. The moment the spoilers engaged, the aircraft's lift was drastically reduced. Instead of gliding smoothly onto the runway, the DC-8 slammed onto the tarmac with extreme force. The impact was so severe that the aircraft's number 4 engine, located on the right wing, detached from its mount. Inside the cabin, the force of the impact jolted passengers violently, causing panic and confusion. But the worst was yet to come. The aircraft bounced back into the air, momentarily airborne again, but now severely compromised. The crew struggled to regain control, but the damage had already been done. The plane, no longer aerodynamically stable, climbed briefly before entering a catastrophic descent. What should have been a routine landing had turned into a nightmare in seconds. As the aircraft plummeted toward the ground, there was no time for the pilots to correct the situation. The nose dropped, and the DC-8 crashed violently into a field near Toronto, exploding on impact. The resulting fireball could be seen from miles away, sending plumes of black smoke into the sky. All 109 people on board lost their lives instantly. What began as an ordinary morning had ended in tragedy. Rescue teams rushed to the scene, but there was nothing they could do. The wreckage was scattered across the crash site, a grim reminder of how a small miscalculation in aviation could have catastrophic consequences. Back at the airport, families waiting for their loved ones were met with an unbearable reality. The flight they expected to arrive safely had vanished from the sky, leaving only heartbreak in its wake. Investigators would soon arrive to piece together the events leading up to the crash, uncovering the fatal mistake that cost so many lives. For Air Canada and the aviation industry, this disaster would serve as a painful lesson. Procedures would be revised, training methods updated, and landing techniques reassessed to prevent such a tragedy from happening again. But for the victims' families, no amount of change could erase the devastation of that day. Flight 621 was lost forever, but its story would serve as a reminder of how precision and caution are critical in aviation. One moment, one decision, and one misunderstanding led to irreversible consequences, proving that even the smallest mistake can change everything in an instant. The aftermath of the crash left investigators searching for answers. Air Canada Flight 621 had gone from a controlled approach to a devastating accident in a matter of seconds. The Transportation Safety Board of Canada, along with aviation experts, arrived at the crash site to determine what had gone so horribly wrong. Wreckage was scattered across the field, with debris spread over a wide area. The force of the impact had been so extreme that little remained intact. Charred fragments of the fuselage, mangled sections of the wings, and unrecognizable pieces of the aircraft's interior lay among the destruction. Investigators began by examining the flight data and cockpit voice recorders. These black boxes, designed to capture vital information, would be key in understanding the sequence of events leading to the crash. The audio recordings revealed the conversation in the cockpit, allowing experts to pinpoint the critical mistake made just before impact. As they reviewed the exchange between Captain Hamilton and First Officer Rowland, it became clear that a misunderstanding had taken place at the worst possible moment. The DC-8 spoilers were designed to deploy only when the aircraft had fully settled on the runway, ensuring a safe reduction in lift and helping the plane slow down. However, the first officer had activated them prematurely, causing an immediate and severe loss of lift. Instead of touching down smoothly, the aircraft slammed onto the tarmac with tremendous force. The right-wing engine broke away from the airframe, further destabilizing the aircraft. With the aircraft momentarily airborne again, the pilots fought to regain control. But the damage had already been done. The structural integrity of the plane had been compromised. The sudden and violent impact had weakened key components, making it impossible to maintain stability. The nose pitched downward as the jet entered an uncontrollable descent. Within seconds, the aircraft struck the ground for the final time, erupting into flames upon impact. The findings were devastating. A single error during the landing sequence had triggered a catastrophic chain reaction. While modern aircraft have automated systems to prevent premature spoiler deployment, this accident highlighted a flaw in existing procedures. The fact that such a simple mistake could lead to complete disaster was alarming. Beyond the technical findings, the emotional toll on the victims' families was immeasurable. Loved ones who had been waiting at the terminal for Flight 621's arrival were suddenly faced with an unthinkable tragedy. Instead of joyful reunions, they received the horrifying news that there were no survivors. Many struggled to comprehend how a routine flight had ended in complete devastation. In the days following the crash, the wreckage was carefully examined for any additional clues. Engineers and aviation specialists worked to reconstruct the events, ensuring that such an error would never happen again. Air Canada, along with other airlines operating DC-8s, reviewed landing procedures, emphasizing the importance of precise communication between pilots during critical flight phases. Training protocols were revised, reinforcing the need for absolute clarity in cockpit commands. Pilots were instructed to verify spoiler deployment only after touchdown, preventing premature activation. The tragedy served as a stark reminder that even the most experienced crews were not immune to human error. For the families of those on board, the loss was unbearable. Parents, children, friends, and colleagues were suddenly gone. Memorial services were held across the country as people mourned the lives lost in an accident that could have been avoided. The names of the victims became more than just a list. They were reminders of the fragility of life and the responsibility that comes with operating an aircraft. Despite the changes implemented after the crash, the pain of that day never faded. Survivors' families continued to seek answers, questioning whether more could have been done to prevent such a tragedy. While aviation safety improved as a result of the investigation, the sorrow left behind could never be erased. The story of Air Canada Flight 621 is not just about a technical failure or a procedural flaw. It is about the consequences of a single moment of misjudgment. A routine landing turned fatal in an instant, proving how unforgiving aviation can be. In the sky, there is no room for error. Every action, every decision carries weight. Years later, the crash remains one of Canada's most devastating aviation disasters. The lessons learned from it continue to shape pilot training, ensuring that the tragic mistakes of the past are not repeated. But for those who lost loved ones that day, the memories remain frozen in time. The echoes of that fatal miscommunication still linger, a sobering reminder that even the smallest mistake can have irreversible consequences. The crash site of Air Canada Flight 621 was a scene of devastation. Emergency response teams arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do. The impact had been so severe that the aircraft disintegrated upon contact with the ground, leaving behind a field of wreckage and fire. Flames consumed what remained of the fuselage, while thick black smoke billowed into the sky, visible for miles. What should have been a normal landing had turned into a catastrophe. Rescuers moved through the debris, searching for any signs of life, but there were none. The sheer force of the crash had made survival impossible. The passengers and crew who had been on board just moments earlier were now part of one of the deadliest aviation disasters in Canadian history. Among the scattered remains were personal belongings, a child's toy, a suitcase, a torn boarding pass, silent reminders of the lives lost in an instant. Authorities quickly secured the area, beginning the difficult process of identifying victims. Families anxiously waiting at the airport were met with an unbearable reality. What was supposed to be a routine arrival had turned into a tragedy that left no one alive. Grief spread through the crowd as news of the accident was confirmed. Some collapsed in shock, while others clung to the hope that a mistake had been made. But there were no mistakes. The crash had claimed every life on board. Investigators faced a difficult task. The aircraft had broken apart on impact, with wreckage strewn over a wide radius. The destruction made it challenging to reconstruct what had happened in those final moments. The black boxes, however, provided crucial insights. The cockpit voice recorder captured the last conversations between the pilots, revealing the fateful mistake that had led to the disaster. The flight data recorder confirmed the aircraft's sudden loss of lift and the violent impact that followed. Aviation experts examined every detail, piecing together the sequence of events. The moment the spoilers had been deployed prematurely, the aircraft had lost its ability to glide smoothly onto the runway. The sudden drop caused the plane to slam into the ground with tremendous force, damaging the right-wing engine and disrupting the flight's stability. The aircraft bounced back into the air, briefly airborne but no longer controllable. Without enough altitude or time to recover, it entered an irreversible descent, ending in total destruction. Recovery efforts continued for days. The remains of the passengers and crew were carefully retrieved, bringing some closure to the families, but nothing could undo the loss. Investigators worked tirelessly to ensure that lessons were learned from the accident. Changes to procedures were recommended, emphasizing clearer communication in the cockpit. Training programs were revised, reinforcing the importance of proper spoiler deployment to prevent similar disasters in the future. The wreckage was eventually cleared, but the scars of the tragedy remained. The crash site became a place of sorrow, where families visited to mourn those they had lost. A memorial was later established, ensuring that the victims would not be forgotten. The pain of that day lingered, a constant reminder of how a single miscalculation could lead to unimaginable consequences. In the aviation industry, the impact of the crash led to meaningful improvements. Airlines took a closer look at their approach and landing procedures, ensuring that pilots fully understood the critical phases of flight. Communication protocols were strengthened, and additional safety measures were implemented to prevent similar incidents. Despite these advancements, the reality of what had happened on that fateful day remained difficult to accept. For the loved ones left behind, life was never the same. Some struggled with the unanswered questions, wondering if more could have been done to prevent the disaster. Others found solace in the changes that followed, knowing that the tragedy had led to increased awareness and safety measures. But no amount of reform could bring back those who had perished. As years passed, the memory of Flight 621 endured. The lessons from the crash continued to influence aviation, serving as a cautionary tale for pilots and airlines worldwide. The heartbreaking loss of 109 lives reinforced the need for absolute precision in the cockpit. It was a stark reminder that even the smallest error could set off a chain of events with irreversible consequences. The tragedy of Air Canada Flight 621 remains one of the darkest moments in Canadian aviation history. Though time has moved forward, the echoes of that day still resonate. Families, friends, and the aviation community continue to remember those who were lost, ensuring that their legacy serves as a reminder of the importance of vigilance, training, and communication in the skies. In the years following the crash, the impact of Flight 621 remained deeply felt. The families of those who perished carried the weight of their loss, holding on to the memories of their loved ones while struggling to comprehend how a routine flight had ended in such devastation. Some found comfort in the changes made to aviation safety in the aftermath, knowing that their tragedy had led to improvements that could save lives in the future. Others were left with an unshakable sense of sorrow, unable to find solace in anything. The investigation had provided answers, but it could never undo what had happened. The realization that a single mistake had caused such an enormous loss was difficult to accept. The thought of how close the plane had been to landing safely only deepened the pain. Just a few more seconds, a slightly different reaction, and the outcome could have been completely different. That haunting "what if" remained in the minds of those who followed the story, a reminder of how fragile life can be. Air Canada took immediate action after the findings were revealed, ensuring that similar errors would not occur again. Training programs were revised, and pilots were given even stricter guidelines when handling aircraft during landing. It became standard practice for crews to verbally confirm critical actions before execution, reducing the chances of miscommunication in high-pressure situations. While these changes were valuable, they came too late for those on board Flight 621. For the aviation industry, the tragedy reinforced the idea that even the most experienced crews were susceptible to errors. Procedures had been in place, but assumptions and routine habits had contributed to the fatal outcome. Pilots worldwide learned from this disaster, becoming more aware of how small lapses could escalate into catastrophic failures. The incident was incorporated into training programs, ensuring that future generations of flight crews would not forget the hard lessons learned. Beyond the technical aspects, the emotional toll on those connected to the flight was immeasurable. Families mourned in different ways. Some sought answers. Others preferred to grieve in silence. Some visited the crash site, standing where their loved ones had spent their final moments. Others could not bear to see it, choosing instead to remember the happier times before that tragic day. The wreckage was eventually cleared, the investigations concluded, and the policies revised, but the scars remained. The site where the plane had gone down became a place of reflection, a silent witness to the events of July 5, 1970. Over time, a memorial was erected in honor of the 109 souls lost that day. Their names were etched into stone, a permanent tribute to the lives cut short by a single moment of miscalculation. As time moved forward, memories of the tragedy faded from the public eye, but they never disappeared. Those who had lost family members still carried the sorrow in their hearts, and every anniversary of the crash served as a painful reminder. Some found strength in sharing their stories, ensuring that the victims were remembered not just as statistics, but as real people with dreams, families, and futures that were taken away too soon. The legacy of Flight 621 extended beyond those directly affected. It became a cautionary tale, a story told not just in aviation circles, but among anyone who understood the gravity of responsibility when lives are at stake. It reminded the world that no detail is too small in ensuring safety, that every step matters, and that even the most routine moments can carry the potential for disaster if not handled with absolute precision. Though decades have passed, the echoes of that day still linger. The lessons from the crash remain relevant, shaping the standards of modern aviation. The advancements made in pilot training, communication, and safety regulations continue to save lives today. But for those who lost someone on that flight, the knowledge that others are safer because of their tragedy is bittersweet. There will always be questions that can never be answered. Could something have been done differently? Could one extra moment of caution have prevented the disaster? No one can change the past, but what remains certain is that Flight 621 left a mark on history that will never be forgotten. The passengers and crew who boarded that plane did not know they were taking their final journey, but their story continues to be told, ensuring that their loss was not in vain. The heartbreak of that day will always be remembered, but so will the lessons learned. And while time moves forward, one truth remains: a single mistake, no matter how small, can alter everything in an instant. But through remembrance and change, those lost are honored, and their legacy lives on in the skies they never reached.